Welcome to the Cultivation Cast by Black Dog LED with Kevin and Noah. In this podcast series, we will cover all things related to indoor cannabis cultivation. Welcome to the Cultivation Cast by Black Dog LED with Kevin and Noah. In our podcast series, we will be covering all things related to indoor cannabis cultivation. Today's topic is going to be CBD, or also known as cannabidiol. We're not going to spend a lot of time going into the science or the reasons you might intake CBD or you might use it with yourself or with family members. We're not going to cover that science side of it. What we're going to focus on is why you might grow it. What are some considerations? How is it different growing a THC focused plant versus something that's more of a hemp or CBD plant? And just kind of cover all those types of things that have to do with the growing or cultivation of it. If you want to learn more about actual CBD and why you might take it, what its benefits are, side effects, what it can or can't do, I recommend Googling CBD. It's a good place to start. And then you will find endless links and knowledge. You can go down that rabbit hole all you want and learn all you want about CBD. So unfortunately, the one thing you won't find is a lot of clinical research because in our country, hemp, CBD, cannabis has been outlawed for a long time. There has been some research going on, but not in depth, and we have very little research on CBD or why it works. The general consensus I've heard, and Kevin might have heard differently, is that there's a suspicion that it's a major anti-inflammatory, but it clearly has other compounds and things that it does because we've all, or most of us have heard the story of Sanjay Gupta and Charlotte's Web and that whole thing where they showed kids that were, having hundreds of epileptic seizures a day, went down to one or two or none just by taking this simple herbal product. So clearly it's more than just an anti-inflammatory, but we don't really understand the true mechanism of action or what's going on with it yet. So cannabidiol, what we're going to talk about today with regard to that is we're going to go into what we've done here at Black Dog. We've been playing with it and growing with it. So let's talk first about the plant. According to the U.S. government or to most regulations today, hemp is anything below 0.3% THC. So for the purpose of this conversation, we're going to talk about CBD specifically that has low to no THC. Of course, you can remove it down to zero through extract processes, but we're going to be focusing on that, not the higher THC stuff. As a matter of fact, Kevin and I were just talking the other day about, we have conversations and we need a nomenclature or a word so we can quickly talk about and to discern what we're talking about with regards to whether we're talking about a CBD-rich plant or a THC-rich plant. And I just today saw that somebody is trying to standardize that, and they're coming up with, they have a 4-level standard, and they call it like type 1, type 2, type 3, and type 4 cannabis. And what they had was, and I might be getting this exactly backwards, but the scale doesn't matter, but let's say number 4 was high THC, low CBD. The next was type 3 would have been a THC mixed, where it's a kind of a balance of THC CBD. And then there was going to be one below that, the number 2 cannabis plant, which they defined as very low THC, but still THC present, a very CBD dominant plant. And then one where it's got no real measurable at all. And that was their tier 4. So we're not going to use that, but there are people starting to try to define this. But for the time being, it's a little hard to discuss because nobody's come up with an accepted terminology for this. But again, for the purpose of this discussion, we are going to be talking about straight CBD stuff that won't really get you high, that you could give to a minor, things like that. So let's dive in and say, first off, when we're growing CBD, Kevin, what would you say are the first things that we talk about are the differences at the very high level between a CBD and a THC-rich plant?
Yeah, so for a very long time, farmers have been growing hemp in their fields for various different reasons. So there's actually been 3 main breeding desires when breeding cannabis plants over the last 1,000 years or so. One is to get a plant that produces great fiber for rope production, for fiber production. And so the plants that have been bred for that purpose actually don't produce as many flowers or seeds, and not necessarily high THC or CBD. They're actually low in both because they've been bred specifically to grow as much stem as possible. And it's great if you're looking for fiber production, but if you're looking for THC or CBD, that's not really the case. So over the last 1,000 years, though, as well, some plants have been bred specifically for their seed production, for oil production, and because the seeds are edible, a lot of these plants produce a lot of seeds and therefore have a lot of potential for the raw material that you can extract CBD and THC from. However, because they were bred primarily with the interest of growing seeds, it wasn't always an important thing for the breeders to maintain certain levels of THC or CBD in there. So oftentimes hemp that is grown specifically for seeds is still relatively low CBD. It generally is very low THC, but sometimes it's also low CBD. Just in the past few years, breeders have started working with hemp plants that show higher levels of CBD expression, and that's what we're really going to be talking about here. Now, it's important to note that over the past 30, 40 years with the underground cannabis cultivation where people were trying to grow high THC plants, a lot of breeding has been done with those plants to get them to produce as many flowers as possible with as high THC and CBD concentrations as possible, with the emphasis very much on THC though. These plants have been bred specifically for growing indoors in the underground growing environment, and they therefore have been selectively bred, whether intentionally or not. They've been selectively bred to tolerate conditions that you might find in someone's closet, including very high levels of fertilizer, including strange lighting levels, including all sorts of things. Most of the hemp plants, the high CBD hemp plants, have not been bred for that purpose yet. These are being derived from crops that were being grown in fields, typically with low levels of fertilizer and consistent lighting, but nothing crazy. So one of the things that we have found that's very different between high CBD plants that would be called hemp and the traditional high THC plants that might be called marijuana by people is that the CBD-rich plants typically can't tolerate as much fertilizer and maybe not quite as much light as the high THC plants do.
Yeah, so one thing what Kevin's talking about is we started experimenting, a couple of years ago with some CBD strains we got our hands on that were hemp, no real THC in there. We started growing them and we thought, how hard could this be? It's literally a weed and it's something from outside, something more. We thought it'd be easier than growing high THC, which to us can be, somewhat difficult to grow depending on the strain you're working with. And we went at it just like we would any of our high THC standard plants. And we were using feeding schedules that we all are familiar with from our cannabis plants. And we learned very quickly, as Kevin was saying, that they cannot handle those level of nutrients. We burned every single plant. And at first we thought it was the person managing the test, the person growing the CBD plants. And we didn't necessarily realize what was happening at that point. And since then, we've come to realize that every single time we've run it across multiple nutrient lines following standard cannabis nutrient regimens, we've burned the plants. And for those of you that don't know, we're talking about a nutrient burn. Kevin can explain in more detail, but we're talking about the plant literally gets crispy and looks like it was burned. And it's just an overdose of salts, essentially.
Yeah, it's an overdose of nutrients, and it shows itself in many different ways depending on what nutrient in particular is being overdosed. But even on times when we've grown the hemp actually grafted onto a cannabis plant, a regular high THC cannabis plant, the branches that were hemp were showing signs of being over-nutrient fed, where the rest of the branches on the same plant, same roots, were doing just fine. So it just wasn't capable of taking as many nutrients as the high THC plants were. Now, over the next few years, the breeding may change and that might be different. But for right now, it's been our experience for sure that the high CBD plants typically can't tolerate quite as much fertilizer. So that's issue number one with them. We haven't killed any plants due to that. We just see signs of giving them too many nutrients, so we start backing off on that. But it's definitely something to keep in mind. So they're not always exactly perfectly the same as growing the high THC plants. However, aside from that one little change, we actually have found that it's pretty much exactly the same as growing your normal high THC marijuana plants.
Well, to your point, though, the other ones that are bred, we haven't found, we're actually looking for, we want to try and find some CBD, high-rich CBD and low THC hemp-type plants that actually have flowers that are as large and beautiful as you can find on the stuff that's been bred for many years, as Kevin was saying. We've yet to find that, wouldn't you say?
We've seen some in fields, actually. We've seen some incredible-looking flowers out in fields. Just hard to get your hands on some of those genetics. But for the most part, people have been spending a very long time breeding the high THC plants to get the largest flowers possible and get the highest production level possible of flowers. And in hemp's breeding history up to this point, it has been bred pretty much explicitly for either its seeds without regard to the CBD levels or the actual fiber that the plant can produce, and not so much specifically for the flowers that it can produce, especially not with high CBD. So it's very young in its breeding program, but there's a lot of different varieties out there that have reasonably high CBD levels with very low THC levels that can actually provide a fair yield per plant.
So, this is good general stuff, but why even grow CBD? I mean, there's a lot of money. A lot of people want to grow, let's say, regular cannabis THC at home for a couple of reasons. One, it's more cost effective over the long run. Yes, the equipment will cost you a chunk up front, but if you run it out even a year, it's going to pay for itself because otherwise you're paying retail prices. So that's why people grow that. And people think, well, CBD, it's just a weed. It doesn't even get you high. But if you start to look out there, and myself and my wife, we both use CBD. And I think we calculated hers the other week per month, her cost would be, I think, around $170 a month to get good high quality CBD over the counter. And so we looked at what my wife was using, and I think it came out at $170 or $230 a month for good, very good, high quality CBD product bought over the internet from a reputable source. So it is not cheap, even though it doesn't get you high, but it's a very powerful medicine, and people are realizing that. So for good quality, well-regulated, tested stuff, it is not cheap. And I believe there's now officially one pharmaceutical that has an on-label use for CBD that's been approved. And don't quote me on this, but I did see an email that said, I think there was going to be a couple grand a month if you were going to buy that and actually use the pharmaceutical, which for something that we could all grow literally in our backyard or in our house, $2,000 sounds like a lot of money to me. So this is why you might want to actually consider growing CBD at home. So what does that mean? And let's dive into a little bit what that would mean with regard to, from beginning to end, what you'd need to do to grow CBD at home. Can you say something?
Yeah, it's basically the same exact process that you would do if you were going to grow high THC plants at home, which is get your hands on seeds of the appropriate strain or cuttings if you can get them, and start planting them indoors, just as we do in all of our grow along videos. And I'll point out right now that we're actually going to be starting a new grow along here with high CBD, low THC plants to show what we can do. And basically the only difference between that and our previous grow alongs is the level of fertilizer we're giving it. We're basically just cutting the fertilizer in about 2/3 and otherwise doing everything exactly the same in terms of topping the plants and training the plants and supporting the plants. And the only other difference is cutting back fertilizer and possibly on when you would actually want to harvest the plants.
Yeah, and let's go into that in a moment. Let's start with these people who might not know how to get a plant. So we've been working with partnerships with, as Kevin was saying, there are genetics companies now working towards CBD. There are breeders working on that problem. There is, I would say, still a bit of a shortage of good, high quality CBD. I mean, if you want to get a really good heirloom tomato seed, you can find that all over the internet. Very good, reputable sources, stuff that's going to be consistent and solid. That just doesn't exist yet with CBD. That level of breeding project, I guess, they're just not there yet. So we've been building relationships at Black Dog with some of the CBD breeders that we've located to be good, reputable ones. And the reason we're going to do a grow along, as Kevin said, is we're going to launch a kit that will allow you to buy a kit from us, and then these specific breeding genetics companies will send you CBD seeds as part of the kit coming directly from them. So you need to get a CBD plant. You either need to find a way to get You either need to be able to find a way to get a cut or get a seed and go from there. So let's talk real quick about seeds. The good thing about CBD is, my understanding is, all cannabis seeds are somewhat legal until they're popped. It's a bit of a gray area. Until you actually germinate that seed and grow it, it's considered more of a novelty. And hemp is even maybe less risky and less of an issue from a legal standpoint. And there is a farm bill that I believe is on Trump's desk right now, waiting for signature from the House and the Senate, that would take CBD or take hemp, remove it from the DEA all the way, put it under agriculture, and turn it into just a plant. Once that happens, you're going to see a plethora and a number of new sites pop up every minute of every day for a while, where you can buy genetics, get your hands on seeds and plants and all that. So we do hope that goes through and that Trump signs that. But until then, you got to find yourself a seed somewhere online or from a friend, or get yourself a cut. Kevin, do you have any other thoughts, like if you're getting a cut, what they should be looking for from a clone?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to know what you're getting a cutting of or what you're getting a clone of. There's a lot of hemp plants out there that people may have found growing in a ditch somewhere, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's a high CBD hemp plant. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of hemp breeding in the past has been done specifically to get the plants to grow extremely tall as fast as possible because they're being harvested for their fiber. It's not what you want to try and grow indoors if you're looking to get a yield of high CBD containing stuff. So it's important to actually try and find a cutting of a plant which is low THC, high CBD, and known to be female. And those are actually somewhat difficult to find. I've, in fact, never seen any offered in any dispensaries around Colorado yet. However, through our contacts, we've been able to find places that are offering hemp cuttings. So it is definitely possible to find.
Yeah, and good point. So the seeds we're getting, the nice thing is before it was just hemp seeds for the last few years we could get our hands on or cut. But now some of the breeders we're trying to partner with here are actually even doing feminized seeds. And for those of you, as Kevin mentioned, it's critical that you have a female plant, not a male plant, for the good flowers. And by having feminized seeds, you're going to increase that chance exponentially. It's no different than with regular cannabis. So now you got a clone or a seed and you're going to grow it. As Kevin said, most of it doesn't change. Our kits will be primarily identical. But again, as Kevin said, we will give some samples of newts that are going to be different than we give for our THC. And the feeding schedule will be cut back significantly. We're going from, I think, 5 parts to 3 parts. So it's a good reduction there you're talking about. And then we're going to go ahead and grow it. Kevin also spoke about, and now would be a good time to jump into the other difference, which is critical for everyone to know. These plants do change and grow. They are very complex. And in meeting with these breeders, we had some suspicions that they completely verified that, yes, when you harvest it, will change the effect of that plant. So if you come from the medicinal world forgetting about cannabis, there are different herbal products. Depending on when you harvest them, it changes completely what's in the roots or what's up in the flower. And that doesn't change for cannabis. So the levels change throughout time. And these plants that might be all hemp and considered hemp, if you let them go too long, they could go hot, or in other words, go above the 0.3% THC and maybe create an undesirable effect. So you want to talk a little about the timing that we're going to use and what we normally do for THC and what we're going to do potentially with this based on the feedback.
Well, with high THC plants, there's a wide range of different strains out there, some of which I've heard claims of 6-week strains. I've never actually seen one myself.
Unicorn.
Yeah, but I've seen 8-week strains for certain, and some that could even probably be harvested around 7 weeks. But for the most part, most of the high THC strains want 9 to 10 weeks to be happy and to get fully ripe flowers. With THC, though, you're looking to get the plant to express all of the different cannabinoids that it can, including all the THC, the CBD, all the CBN. You want to get everything out of that plant that you can. With a high CBD plant, your goal is to get the level of CBD as high as possible, but keep the THC as low as possible. And THC, as Noah was mentioning, plants produce things over time, and their content, their makeup of the plant changes over time as the plant ripens or goes through different growth phases. And with the high CBD, high CBD hemp plants, they do have a tendency to go over the 0.3% THC limit as their flowers are getting more ripe. So even though they might be the same readiness to harvest after 10 weeks as a high THC plant in terms of how ripe the flowers are, how ripe the trichomes are, if they have seeds, how ripe the seeds are in the flowers, you actually probably want to pull your high CBD plants down a few weeks early. And we've heard different things from different breeders. Between 6 and 7 weeks is typically when they recommend pulling their plants down so that they don't end up with a THC level that's too high.
Yeah, that's a good point. They did the work because even a home grower can't. Even here at Black Dog, we couldn't do it. They were able to, take a field, pull different cuts or different plants and flowers out of there, every day or every couple days throughout there and see and chart out and test those and chart and see when their THC started to spike. Because again, for them, it's critical. They can't have a product that's high THC. They could have to plow under their entire field at that point because they're not necessarily licensed to grow high THC cannabis. So it is critical, and they've done a lot of research around that to try and hone in on when is the CBD at its highest peak without us having that THC that's going to cause problems that we don't want in that case.
And I should add that these breeders are specifically breeding these plants to keep the THC levels as low as they possibly can while still maintaining CBD levels as high as they possibly can. So even if you don't harvest them early and you do let them go to the complete end of their flower cycle, they may still be well under 1% THC, which does not count as far as the legal limit is concerned, but may still not actually be high enough concentrations to actually get you high. So there is a difference between the high CBD plants and the high THC plants for certain. It's not just when you pull them down. It's not like you can take a plant like Blue Dream that's designed to be high THC and just pull it down in 6 weeks and call it a high CBD plant. It doesn't work that way. But with the high CBD plants, if you want to make absolutely certain that you're keeping the THC levels at a very minimal level, you would actually want to pull those plants down at between 6 and 7 weeks in flower.
That's a good point and an important distinction there, Kevin, that it's not just when you're taking them down, that we don't want people out there giving their kids or giving people they don't want THC, giving them a 7-week-old plant that's just chock full of THC. So thanks for pointing that out. Another question there for you is, so when we look at this and we talk about CBD and we're going to go ahead and grow it, our yields are going to be different. We haven't found stuff that produces, again, getting back to that we've got access to good genetics here in Colorado, and we've got great genetics in our bank that we play with and we like to do R&D with, and they yield quite well. But again, without a huge breeding project behind CBD, the yields will be lower than you might be expecting if you're used to growing good, high quality genetics of THC rich plants.
And as more breeding goes on, that will definitely change over time. It should be entirely possible to breed plants that will produce the same weight in flowers of high CBD flowers as high THC flowers. It's just that the breeding projects to increase the yields of high THC flowers have been going on surreptitiously underground, but for many decades now. People would always hang on to seeds and plants that produced very well, and it's only been in the past maybe 5 years at the very most that same process has been started for CBD. So it's a little bit different, and it's not that it's not possible to get the same yields, just that on average we're not quite there yet, probably.
Yeah, just the genetics really aren't there yet. But the other thing I was going to ask is, Kevin, do you feel, since all this testing with the CBD by the genetics companies we're working with, it's all done in the field, and they would bring in plants throughout the growth cycle and test them and see where the CBD and the THC was. Since our customers would be under our lights with full UV, just like they'd find under the sun, will we expect kind of the same results in terms of the aging and the ripening of the flowers and fruit on that plant? Or would you expect it to be different? And then what about, would you expect it to be slightly different for somebody using a basic white LED or an HPS with no UV in it?
So with regards to growing outdoors versus under our Phytomax 2 lights, with UV in our spectrum, it would be basically the same. We're putting out the same ratio of UV light that the natural sunlight does, minus UVB, because we don't want to hurt the plants. But you're going to see the same concentrations, and it won't make a big difference between whether it was grown in a field or grown under lights, except that if it's grown in a field, it's getting rained on, wind is blowing by it, you're getting dust on it, insects, all the stuff that happens to a plant out in a normal field, but specifically the rain combined with baking heat of the sun can actually reduce concentrations of things. So you should be getting a slightly higher percentage of THC in terms of total extract or total yields from the plant. Not necessarily the ratio being different between CBD and THC, but just a higher total amount of CBD if you're growing it indoors with proper UV light. Now, without UV light, if you were using just one of the basic white so-called full spectrum LEDs, you're not going to see the same level of trichome production and THC and CBD expression that you see outside. So while CBD levels might be down, so will THC levels, and your overall yield would be down as well compared to growing with UV.
So now we've covered a little bit of the growing and, like Kevin said, taking down early and all that. So let's say you're at week 6 or 7, you decided my plants are ready to come down. Now you've got flowers. Well, you can just go ahead and cure them like you're used to with regular THC-rich cannabis. If you're used to that, you could take them down, trim them, cure them, dry them, and then cure them in a jar or something and use them for smoke, just like any other flower. And we have played with that smoking flower, and I can personally say I enjoy it. It's very good. It's a great way if you need help sleeping, potentially, if you want to go that direction instead of ingesting it a different way. But let's say you want to do something different. The most simple would be just taking the flowers, drying them, curing them, and smoking them. But let's go a little further. The other things you can do, the most basic thing we started with here when we played with CBD was good old-fashioned bubble bags. We actually took CBD-rich flowers, brand new bubble bags, so they had no THC, had never touched a plant, and ran hash through that. And we ended up with some really beautiful bubble hash, good old-fashioned hash that was pure CBD, and it was strong and it was great. You could put it in and, again, still smoke that, put it in with a joint or put it in that way to enrich CBD in anything you want, and that was good. We've tried other things as well. We haven't had great luck with rosin pressing with the limited genetics we've had a chance to play with yet in terms of the yields. But one of our guys here has had the ability to do CBD with a solvent extraction process where he ran ethanol through it, and he had good results with that. So what we're finding is you can do a lot of the things we're used to with THC-rich cannabis, but at the same time, it's going to come down, like Kevin said, to the genetics, the plant you have. They're all different, and you're going to see different things coming out of them. So we're going to hold off on saying what's perfect or not or what's great until we have a chance to play with more genetics. We have certain THC-rich plants that just don't press well, even though they look beautiful and look like they should. They just don't yield well in a rosin press, let's say. So you kind of have to know your genetics and know your methods, but there are a lot of fun things you can do with it. You know, once you get the CBD out, whether you're doing it hash or you could do it old-fashioned, make CBD butter. You could go ahead and go that route and just bake it in, make CBD brownies instead of pot brownies. So those are all available to you, things you can do. So it really is a whole world of non-psychoactive medicinal herbal products that we can all get into creating here. And they are beautiful plants. They're just as much fun to grow as traditional THC-rich cannabis and all those things. And if you have a grow set up and you want both, you could alternate your garden or grow them at the same time. The THC is not going to infect the other plants with THC. I don't know if Kevin can tell me that would happen, but I think we're pretty safe on that one. So you can have a lot of fun with this right in amongst your other plants. And we are often nowadays growing in our grows CBD along with THC-rich plants. So it's all out there. And we want to help people understand that they can do this. We have no problem with you buying some of the great products that are on the market. And there are some very reputable, great products on the market you can buy. But if you want to make your own medicine and get into it, there's nothing wrong with that. And it's very available to you. Again, they call it weed for a reason. It just grows. So it's not hard to grow. The higher quality you want to grow, that's where it gets a little more touchy, but you can have a lot of fun with it. So we're going to move on to our grow alongs next, doing some CBD. For those of you that don't know, on our YouTube channel, and we post it in our social media, we have grow alongs where we show our complete grow kits with our lights, where we've taken all the guesswork out of the gear, and you can go ahead and just buy those or buy the gear anywhere you want and just get one of our lights. But we're going to do grow alongs like we've done in the past, but with CBD. Right now, you can find 2 or 3, I think 3 grow alongs at least right now on our YouTube channel. They are complete grow alongs from beginning to end, showing you how to cultivate cannabis, what you need to do throughout the process, how to take it down, everything. Why? Because we get a lot of questions and a lot of people need to find good information. So we've put that out there. We welcome you to watch it. If you're really interested in CBD, stay tuned because we're going to be starting those shortly. The grows are just getting started with the CBD, and it'll take us a couple weeks to maybe a month to get them out. But as soon as we're ready, we'll be putting those out on our social media and YouTube. So if you subscribe to us across any of our social media channels, you will get notification when we start to launch those. We'll make sure everyone knows. And we hope you join us for those grow alongs. We're looking forward to doing them. We are going to try some of the new genetics from these really cutting edge CBD genetics companies that we're finding here in Colorado that we're working with. So we're excited, and we hope you are too. So do you have any other thoughts, Kevin, on CBD, or any thoughts? Have you used it, and have you found any effect from it when you've played around with CBD at all?
Yeah, CBD is definitely very useful for a number of different things. Suffer from aches and pains, and it can help with that much better than a lot of other things can. So it's definitely something that I think is definitely under-researched at the moment, definitely underutilized at the moment. And as more and more people become exposed to it, and hopefully when the Farm Bill passes, hopefully the Farm Bill will pass so that it becomes descheduled and no longer considered a Schedule I drug, such that people can actually get access to it, because there's a lot of good, I think, that it can do for a lot of people.
Yeah, agreed completely. So, well, thanks again for joining us today. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this installment of Cultivation Cast. If you have any questions about the content or have any ideas for a future topic, please do send them to us. We'd love to get your thoughts or feedback. You just go ahead and send them to podcast@blackdogled.com. That's PODCAST @blackdogled.com. Have a great day and happy gardening.